Can you travel across Death Stranding using only a floating carrier? So, if you've played Death Stranding at all, you probably know by this point that you can ride floating carriers. You've probably even done it yourself, but found pretty much no use for it except sliding down steep hills. And that's because it's not really useful for anything other than carrying cargo. It's really slow, doesn't get you across many surfaces, and is terrible at climbing anything that is a tiny bit steep. So, obviously, the first thought that entered my head was, shall we see if we can travel across the entire game using only this? The rules are straightforward. Unlike my straight line video, I can go wherever I'd like, provided I exclusively use my floating carrier for transport. My goal is to reach the other end of the region using as few structures as possible, because, well, following roads all the way to South Knot would be a little bit easy. So, let's begin. My goal for the eastern region is to reach Port Knot City, starting from the isolation ward north of capital Knot City. Pretty simple. It started off very smooth, no issues whatsoever. The town area you start in with the buildings is very smooth, and the carrier, although it's slow, has absolutely no problems traversing this. Even the little ascent towards capital Knot was no problem, and before I knew it, we were in the grasslands. I thought I'd have more chance going around this area, wrapping from the way station north of Capital Knot and then making a beeline towards Port Knot from there. In order to reach the way station, I had to pass through a BT area, and this is where the problem started. We weren't even 5 minutes into this journey and I was already having problems. While riding a floating carrier, you're completely defenseless from BTs. You can't cut the cords, you can't equip a weapon to shoot them or throw grenades, so your only option without dismounting the carrier is to avoid them. It's extremely difficult to control your momentum on this thing, but I tried my best to take it slowly. I wrapped around the side. I knew where the bulk of the BTs were here, and to the best of my ability, I tried sticking as far away from them without going up to where the carrier couldn't handle the uphill angle. And this went pretty well, until it didn't. I suddenly went sliding downhill, I got knocked off the carrier, and alerted the BTs. I ran away until the deck started spinning again, and got straight back onto the carrier. The environment here was not easy to traverse, so I tried using the momentum from going downhill towards the BTs to try and maybe slip by them. And this part was amusing. I failed to do this and alerted another BT, but the carrier's bizarre momentum caused me to fly downwards again and escape them almost immediately. The deck was blue and I considered myself safe, so I just kept going in the direction I was going in, and surely enough, I'd escaped the BT zone and we were on our way to Port Knot again. The problems did not end here though. Right after the BT zone was a mule zone, so I had about 30 seconds of breather before I had to watch out for terrorists. They didn't cause me any issues though, but Kojima decided that he still wasn't done with me. Before reaching the distribution center west of Capital Knot, there was another BT zone for me to deal with. I actually expected this one, as this is another extremely common place to encounter them, but the game had given me enough hazards at this point that this is the last thing I wanted. With this zone, I decided to just go as fast as I could straight through it, and thankfully this worked out without any issues. One BT did chase me, but he didn't try very hard and I was able to sneak through. And with that, we'd made it to the distribution center. This was certainly a gauntlet of BTs after mules after BTs, but at least the terrain was relatively friendly. And to celebrate, I put a happy face right here. Come give it some likes, please? I'm desperate. And of course, as if the gauntlet we just went through wasn't enough, the part coming up proved to be one of the most agonizing and frustratingly difficult sections of this entire run. I had to go uphill through BTs. And it sounds pretty bad on paper, but this was worse than I ever could have imagined. First of all, I had to decide whether I was going to try going left or right up the hill, as there's two separate paths. Both looked as bad as each other, huge, steep, and slathered in BTs. The three worst things I could deal with. I tried for what felt like hours with almost no progress. The way the floating carrier controls made it all so frustratingly awkward, and every time I got somewhere and made some progress, Foreman Yeetus would randomly turn around and I'd go soaring back down to where I started. The best way to navigate up surfaces like this is to be really stubborn. Just keep your camera at the same angle and do nothing but spam square. You'll see me do this a lot when I'm going uphill. Every time I made some distance doing this, I'd either go soaring back down, as I mentioned animation before, or the Ojdek animation would play and it would cease my control of the carrier, resulting in the exact same thing. Eventually, I made a breakthrough. The game gave me a tip to turn off the animation of the Ojdek opening. I didn't even know this was a setting, so I went to turn it off, and after an absurd amount more of trial and error, I miraculously found my way up the hill. I have absolutely no idea how this happened, but it did, and here we are. However, I knew we were not finished yet, nowhere near in fact. I was right in the middle of a massive BT zone, and I still had to go upwards. I still had the chance to blow all of this progress away by sliding back down, so I had to be extremely careful. I decided to wrap around to the right, not only to avoid BTs, but in the hopes that the rocks behind me would stop me if I fell. And although it was very slow, this worked like a charm, and I was in the final stretch of this BT zone. Just before I reached the end, I got a little bit too close to one, and it started to chase me. Unfortunately, there was a safe house blocking my exit, so I just went to the side of it and as far away from the BT as possible. But my efforts were futile, and eventually the BT caught up and knocked me right off my carrier. I ran away to the other side of the rocks and dismantled the safe house, getting back onto the carrier near where I got spotted by the BT. And finally, we were finished with that zone. I cannot tell you how much of an agonizing slog that was. A giant BT area that goes completely uphill while utilizing something that controls as reliably as my mental health was not easy and not fun either. Yet, somehow, here I was, staring at the final descent towards Port Knot City, and this descent was well worth it. And now that we've arrived at Port Knot, it's time we departed on the second part of this journey into the central region. I decided to do something slightly different with the central region, and I made two goals for us. First, I tried to do something a little bit more realistic and see if I could head to South Knot City starting from Lake Knot. And after I did this, I tried to see if I could get to Mountain Knot City, also starting from Lake Knot. I didn't even consider trying to get to the Kyle Relay, as the environment heading from Mountain Knot City down south was almost definitely insurmountable, but more on that later. So, starting from Lake Knot City, I decided my first checkpoint was going to be the Engineer, and to get there, I had to go through Mule territory. This wasn't all that bad though, honestly. I ended up negating the ping as soon as I entered the area and hugged the outskirts of the zone. I didn't want to go far off course, as I planned to hug the left as soon as this zone was over, all the way to South Knot City, passing by the film director and sticking to the beach. But I did actually end up getting spotted and I had to skate away. Thankfully, the slippery Kyrillian the mules throw at you doesn't actually do anything when you're on a floating carrier, so I was able to just get some speed on the downhill section as we were leaving. I tripped this poor fella up, and before I knew it, I was far enough away from the mules. So, all in all, honestly not that bad. Although, that guy I ran into might need some checking up on. So, here we are at the Engineer. A nice journey so far without many issues at all. After saying hello to some fellow porters, I began what was undoubtedly the easiest part of this entire expedition. I decided to wrap all the way around the left side of the map, around to the film director. I knew that going this way would mean I wouldn't run into any complications with mules or BTs, and that the environment was extremely flat. Funnily enough, I was entirely correct. This footage was just 4 whole minutes of me just floating. Nothing got in my way, nothing slowed me down, it was incredibly relaxing. I swear, during recording I had a smile on my face this whole time because it was just so laughably easy. And then I came to what I call the Dark Hills. The hills that always have BTs. At this point I was afraid because this was yet another BT zone that I had to go through, but it was also steep and uphill. I knew it wasn't going to be as difficult as the one in the eastern region, but I wasn't looking forward to traversing this one at all. Thankfully, with the option to disable the Ojdek animation, most of this wasn't too terrible. I sort of just slipped and slid looking for the flattest and most opportune area for me to float up. It needed to be as flat as possible, so I had the easiest time. This BT area is huge and had plenty of areas for me to go, and I was now just relying on the friendliness of the beached things. I eventually found a nice way through this zone, on its outskirts. Once again, I just kept my camera at the exact same angle and spammed square. The Ojdek was blue throughout this entire ascent, and I was very confident that we'd reach the top. But even with the stubbornness, the floating carrier just stayed in one spot here, but just to the left of this route was another path through a timefall shelter that I decided to take. From here, I'd finally made it through the dark hills and I had a speedy ascent down to the beach. I was lucky and did not alert a single BT throughout this entire process, thank God. And from here, it was a little ride through yet another BT zone, but we arrived safely at South Knot City. But I knew this wasn't enough. I knew this was not the end goal here. So I headed back to Lake Knot and decided to make it my goal to make it all the way to Mountain Knot City. I knew this was going to be much more difficult. However, the beginning of this journey was extremely uneventful. It was so uneventful that I even named my video file 05 uneventful.mp4. It wasn't until we got to 06 abandoned site.mp4 that things started to get interesting. This right here is another BT zone. Fortunately, this one is nice and flat, so didn't cause many issues. Not for me anyway, my fellow porters over there weren't having as good of a time as me. The next section kinda surprised me though. It surprised me in the sense that I was not expecting it to be so painful. The terrain here looks kind of friendly, it's just uphill, so I'd have to be stubborn, but it actually took me a whole 17 minutes to finally get up this tiny little hill. I think I would have went a different way, but nope. All this time I also had to spam square, so my thumb was sore. It certainly wasn't anywhere near as bad as the 2 hours and 40 minutes the Eastern Region ascent took me though. We're now coming up to the incinerator north of Lake Knot City. As some of you may know, the road from Lake Knot passes right past the way station and the incinerator, so I actually had to take another alternate path, as I had to use as few structures as possible, and just using roads the whole way would not be fun. Still though, there were no problems here, a couple of slightly troublesome rocks, but nothing too bad. Now we had one more problem before reaching the distribution center north of Mountain Knot. A homo demon camp. I was much more afraid of homo demons than mules because mule equipment didn't really work on me while I'm on a floating carrier and they never used guns. Demons, well, they'll use weapons and kill you on sight. So in my head before heading down, I decided that just beelining towards the distribution center and riding straight through was the best idea. And here's how that went. Yeah, they haven't exactly got the best aim in the world, have they? In any case, I was relieved to get through that as seamlessly as I did, and I was now at the distribution center north of Mountain Knot City. We were getting closer and closer. There's really nothing worth mentioning from here to the photographer, which is round about the area I decided to cut into the mountains in order to reach Mountain Knot, and it was just another uneventful area with a couple of rivers that were no problem to cross. When I made the cut into the mountains, however, I encountered another BT zone. I killed the catcher of this zone a long time ago, but I suppose beach things repopulate the area after a certain amount of time has passed. The terrain of this zone was pretty troublesome. It was all slightly uphill with hundreds of rocks and bits of pillars that would stop me from going in a certain direction. I wrapped around the right side as it was the least problematic, and I figured it would give me the best chance of getting through, and I actually caught the attention of one BT, but I guess he was feeling as lazy as I do every day and he didn't chase me whatsoever. Past this, I hugged the left side next to the river and I was safe from them again. This was the final BT zone I had the pleasure of encountering, thank God. This river was big. It was so big that I actually couldn't find a way across it without using this bridge. I tried grabbing momentum from the hill, but it never quite gave me enough to get across, and it always left me stuck in the water, so I had to use this bridge. Sorry, guys. Mountain Knot City was so close now. We just had one ascent up this one last cliff and we'd make it there. But little did I know that this final push was probably the second most painful part of this entire trip. I'm not even going to say much about this because you get the picture by now. Extremely steep uphill sections. Spam Ham keeps turning around randomly and I keep plummeting down to the bottom, but damn, this part sucked so much. This took me almost an hour to get up here after countless times of just falling straight back down again. Called this section the Painful Ascent, although that name could easily be given to the BT zone in the eastern region, because that was undoubtedly the worst part about this whole challenge. But here we were, Mountain Knot City. I'm not gonna lie, I seriously didn't think it was possible to reach Mountain Knot without using roads on a floating carrier, but here we were. We actually did it. The only structure we used was one bridge to get across a huge river, but we didn't actually ban the usage of structures, just made it so we had to use them as little as possible, so mission accomplished there. And before anybody asks, yes, I did try to make it to the chiral relay, but as you can probably guess, the terrain makes it impossible. I tried for a long time to find any possible way whatsoever to get from Mountain Knot to the chiral relay, but I just couldn't. Not on a floating carrier, no sir. So we still have one more region to go through, which is the western region. Admittedly, my expectations were incomprehensibly low here. Terrain in this region is absolutely ridiculous to traverse on foot, never mind on a floating carrier, and funnily enough, my expectations were still too high. The only section I could seriously go through without issues was the absolute very beginning, just outside the distribution center. Once I got past the giant chiralium pool, I was stopped dead in my tracks by, well, just about bloody everything. Pillars poking out from the ground, random metal girders protruding from dilapidated buildings, you name it. So I decided to go no further. I couldn't even get further up this building, even by being relentlessly stubborn. I just couldn't. I even compromised and passed this manually on foot and got back on the carrier past here, but it was futile as the terrain only gets worse. So I gave up. You cannot make it through this region riding only a floating carrier. There's no way. One thing I did notice in this area, though, is that one of these buildings has a link to my Twitch channel. How did that get there? So, there we have it. Can you travel across Death Stranding using only a floating carrier? The eastern region, absolutely. There's a painful, and I mean absolutely painful ascent through a BT zone there, but you can eliminate that threat by killing the catcher of that area beforehand as well, so you just have to deal with the uphill part, even though that's a pain in the ass in itself. And the central region, well, you can make it to South Knot easily, and you can also make it to Mountain Knot with a bit of determination. But all the way to the chiral relay, you can forget about that. And the western region, well, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to check out my other video where I try to cross the entire game in a completely straight line. And check out my Twitch and other social media in the description below. Until next time, thanks for watching.